Okay, Mum. So you were living with your mum and dad in this apartment upstairs, and you were going to the Culloden Street in Poplar, in the Culloden Street School, and then at some point in time, when you were a girl, there was a war starting. So how did you hear about it, and what did it mean to you?
I was 9 years, nearly 10, and we were sat in the living room listening to the wireless, and my parents told me, keep very quiet, there's something important coming up on the radio. And that's when we heard the announcement that we were at war with Germany. My school and all the people involved had made arrangements for all the children to be evacuated to a safe place.
Was that straight away?
3rd of September, that was when the war was announced, and it was more or less just around then. And what had happened, the government had realised that this was more than likely to happen, so they'd put things in motion to get the children to safety. And what they were doing was organising evacuation of the children from all sorts of vulnerable areas to a safer place. Our school chose Swindon, and I went around that time, 3rd of September or just after, 1939. We went to a train station, caught a steam train to Swindon, and when we got there it was getting a bit late, and it was my class, the children from my class and my teacher. We went as a group. We had labels tied on us to show who we were and which school we belonged to. We had a gas mask in a canvas sling bag that we slung over our shoulder. We had one suitcase each, a small suitcase, with clothes, one favourite toy, which I took a little doll, and I took a book, and we had another bag with some sandwiches for lunch. We went in those days, steam trains had separate carriages. There was no corridors. It was just you got into a carriage and you were with those people, and you couldn't get out until the train stopped. We all got aboard the train, which at that time, because it was all new, it felt like an adventure. I wasn't feeling sorry to be leaving my parents or my home. It was exciting. It was like an adventure. We got on board the trains and off we went to Swindon. We got off there and we were all taken to the church hall, but by that time it was getting a bit late, so they hadn't decided who was staying with who. What they did, they found us an overnight place to stay, and I ended up in a sweet shop, and I thought, oh lovely, I like this, but it was only for one night. Next day they assembled us again and they sorted out who the people were willing to give us shelter, and I was put with an elderly gentleman in his house who had a live-in housekeeper and a husband. The two men both worked for the railway. Nearly everybody in Swindon worked for the railway. It was a place where they built the engines. It was a place where lots of them were. It was like a bus station for trains. And anyway, I was taken to these people. It was a terraced house with an outside toilet. There was a sitting room which they didn't use. There was a living room behind it, which was the place where we spent most of our time, and the kitchen. But upstairs, I was put into the gentleman's bedroom, and there was a curtain between the two beds, a ceiling to floor curtain that pulled back, and I slept there, and I was 9. Well, three weeks later, I had my 10th birthday. I do not remember ever children coming to that house. I do not remember celebrating my birthday. I do not remember being allowed to go out and play very much at all. I used to walk to school and back on my own, but school was in a church, an old church that had a choir stalls in the main building and rooms at the back, and one of these rooms was our classroom, and we stayed in the same room with our same teacher for 6 months. One good thing about it was we used to sit in the choir stalls and sing, and it echoed all round the church, and we used to sing the wartime sort of songs, like in the Sergeant Major's stores, and funny songs, and it used to echo around the church. That was a good thing. I can remember one good thing, a day out, we were taken to a farm to see the animals and to learn about how they were treated and everything. And that was a nice day. But mostly, because we'd gone in September, that winter was one of the coldest. It was very bitter. You opened the front door, there was a small space with a wall around it with a little railings across, and at once the side wall you came out and there were a couple of bushes and you could see all the cobwebs with the frost on. But what I remember were the icicles hanging from everywhere. It was so cold. I had Christmas there, but it was a very quiet Christmas because they were elderly people. They went to church regularly, which I had to do, and I had to learn a verse from the Bible by heart every week so that I could say it back to the Sunday school teacher. I liked my teacher at school. I used to walk there and back, but I had to come straight home. I wasn't allowed to stay out and play with friends or anything. So really, I didn't have many friends because we didn't see each other, apart from in the classroom. I was given one treat, I remember. We went to the cinema to see a Shirley Temple film, which I enjoyed. One of the shops not too far from where we lived, I was given a pudding basin and told to go and buy faggots and mushy peas, and they put them straight into your pudding basin and you took them home. I've never experienced that before. But I was getting more and more lonely and missing home, not being enamoured by these people. I had some pocket money that I'd saved, and I walked to Woolworths and bought myself a dictionary for 9p, 9p, and I used to learn a new word every day. I used to like paperwork and reading and writing. But I got told off for wasting my money, which I didn't understand. One weekend, the person who owned the house took me on a coach to Paynton to see his mother, and we stayed there overnight. I can remember drinking ginger beer poured out of stone bottles. I can remember them taking us to where there was a seat overlooking the harbour, and it was surrounded by a big shrub with pink flowers, and I learned later it was called tamarix. I enjoyed that weekend, but that was the first time I caught a glimpse of Stonehenge, because we passed it in the coach. Apart from that, life was dull and lonely, and I wanted to go home. So in the meantime, Mum parents had been in touch with my Auntie Rose, Mum's sister, who had been evacuated to Chard. Ellen went to a different school than me, and because she had a 3-year-old daughter, that was Elsie, there were special arrangements, and they'd been sent as a family to Chard. Uncle Charlie was still working in London, and they allowed me to come home, which I was overjoyed with. And in the back garden they built an Anderson shelter, which I explored, and for their point of view it was a needed thing, but it wasn't very comfortable or even dry or warm. But in the street outside, between the rows of houses, they'd started building two brick air raid shelters, one at each end of the street, and they were half built. And I used to play. I met up with some of the old boy mates that I used to play with, and we all played cowboys and Indians around the buildings. But I wasn't there long. My Auntie Rose had been in touch with the authorities because the lady she was staying with had a sister who'd offered to take me, but it had to go through the authorities. And they sent a letter to my parents saying the next evacuation was Wednesday, and I had to be ready to go that day, which I did. My mother took me to Victoria coach station, and I was put on a royal blue coach, and it was about a 4-hour journey, all by myself, with a big box of Maltesers, which is why I love Maltesers. And when I got to Chard, there was my Auntie Rose waiting for me. I found Chard an amazing place. There were streams running down either side of the main street where we were walking, and trees growing out of the pavement. In London, if you wanted to see trees, you went to the park. This was countryside. This was lovely. I love country. And then we went to the top of town and through a narrow place called Bath Street, which had cottages either side, but they had streams running alongside, and there was a paving stone over the stream to get from the pavement into the houses. I found it all very fascinating. They took me to my foster home, who were Daisy and Les Coverwell. Very nice people. They had a son called Owen, who's a bit younger than me, and I stayed there. And in the mornings, Owen used to take me across the fields to Berridge Common, where we picked mushrooms. And now this is something utterly new. And they cooked them for breakfast with bacon. And I never tasted that before, and that was lovely. Potatoes, they were calling tiddies. And I didn't realise what a tiddy was until later on I began to understand the West Country dialect. It was funny, and I quite liked it there. And I went to a junior school where apparently Michael Aspel, who was a TV personality later on in life, was also there. I went to that school.
Before you came to Chard, so you went back from Swindon back to London.
Yes.
And in this time, which was a short time, you said, was a few weeks or something like that. Yeah?
Yes.
Did you experience air raids? Did you have to go?
No, they hadn't started. Mm-hmm. It was. I was 6 months away, so it was about March 1940 when I went back. But the air raids proper didn't start until later in 1940. So I was all right. But my mother was enduring them later in the year, so she asked permission and they allowed her to come and stay at Daisy Coverwell's as well. So mother got away from the bombing and came and stayed in the same house.
So what signs were there when you were in London? What signs were there that there was a war on? What did you see?
All these new places that were being built. Everywhere at night it was all blackouts. All these street lamps were, none of them were lit. Everything, it just looked different. And a lot of the things like the man who used to come around with his cart and didn't do that anymore. And it was all strangely different. But
so were there were already young people being drafted and signed up and going off and
young men were leaving and joining up, yes.
So the structure of the society
Yes.
in the towns, in the
Yes,
villages was changing?
Yes, the young people were leaving and married men with children.
And children were evacuated as well?
The children were evacuated, the men went into the forces, and the mothers went to work in ammunitions factories and all things to help the war effort. And as they had an air raid siren, which they used to sound if there was an air raid, if they discovered that there were bombers on the way or something, because of the lookouts and everything, they used to sound the siren and everybody rushed for shelter. But houses got bombed, people got killed. It wasn't a happy time.
But in the time that you were there, that was before the
that
bombing.
hadn't started, because the bombing didn't start till later in the year.
So how did you feel? You got back from Swindon, all the men were gone away, a lot of children had gone away.
The children I used to play with, there weren't many left, just the odd one. The boy downstairs was still there. His father was a London fireman, so he was very busy.
So it was optional, the evacuation?
It really was. If you had any sense, you went. And when the bombing started, it was a roundup of all the children left to get them to safety.
But how in that 3 weeks or so that you were there, how did you feel? I mean, with it all changing,
I felt pleased to be home, but home wasn't as it was. It was different, and I felt pleased to be away from the place I'd been staying in. I really hadn't. At the end, I just wanted to be away from it.
Did you still visit your nan in that time?
When I came to Chard, I found that my nan had come to Chard with my auntie. I didn't know that, but then I was only 10, so I wouldn't know much about anything really. I was very pleased to see that my nan was staying in this house with my auntie, and of course my cousins. I remember it was the fruit shops with their stalls outside were selling lovely ripe plums and fresh fruit and everything. It was lovely. I enjoyed that. But getting back to London, I knew I had to go away again, so I just made the most of the time I was there. I used to go walks on my own because I was getting to the stage when I knew more about places and finding my way. One of the things I did, which was stupid, was I went to what they call East India Dock Road, which is a main road, and you crossed East India Dock Road to get to the mouth of the Blackwall Tunnel. And I decided, because I'd loved Greenwich Park, I decided I'd walk through the tunnel. So I started, and I went in, and it got darker with just small lights. The sides of the walls were covered in white tiles, which were damp. There was a narrow walkway each side of and through the tunnel, because it was a traffic tunnel really. And by the time I reached the first set of steps to go up, I was glad to get out. And then I went back home. But I used to explore. And another time, I used to love the parks my parents used to take me to, and I managed to walk somehow to one of the big parks, and I met up with several of my friends that were still in London, and we were all having a nice time in the park. Then it was time to come home, but they come by train, but I walked, and they all had their return tickets. So they said, come with us. And they put all the tickets together, and when we were going through the barrier to get out, they handed him a bunch of tickets and we all rushed out together. So I'm afraid I was naughty there. But I wasn't there much longer, so it was Chard.
Your dad's job as a stevedore?
My father worked in the docks, and the docks were very vulnerable because obviously they were a good place for the Germans to aim for and hit. They just followed the River Thames up to the docks. After I left, when the bombing started, my mother had come down to Chard to be safe. He was still there working, and I remember people used to rush down to the underground stations to get away from the bombing if the siren went, and they'd rush anywhere to the nearest stations. But houses were being bombed, and then my father had a 65th birthday, which was retirement time. They had doodlebugs and all sorts, but a bomb or something fell at the end of our street, and the explosion brought the ceilings down in our apartment, and everything fell onto the furniture and everything else. Some of it was destroyed, some could be rescued, and my father decided it was time to leave London and join us. But first he had to rescue what was good, any good, and it was taken to my cousins who lived just outside London at Wanstead, and they stored it in their house because they had a big house with no children, and they used to sit under the stairs when the siren went, and Jim would knit socks sitting under the stairs. It was funny. But they took our furniture that was any good, and also my father gave them our piano to sell to help to pay for the storage. And then he came to Chard, and Uncle Charlie, his house, he packed it up because it was his own house, and he packed it up and packed everything up, and he too came to Chard.
What was the relation of Uncle Charlie? Where did he fit in?
He was Rosie's husband.
Oh, I see. He was the
so
butcher.
So my uncle, yeah, he was a butcher. It belonged to the butcher family. The Day's butchers were a big family, and he was one of the sons.
So then we had you, your mum, and you all in Chard.
All staying at Daisy Coverwell's, and then she was expecting another child. So we obviously had to find somewhere to live, which was not easy, and we didn't have much money. My dad, he made friends with the manager of Boots the Chemist, and this gentleman told him there was an empty cottage at the back of Boots. You went up the side street and through a little passage to get there, but it was very neglected because it hadn't been lived in, because it was condemned as being unfit for living in. But we had to find somewhere, so we moved in, and there was a scullery at one end with a door. You open the door and go in the scullery. Then from there you went into the kitchen, which had like stone paving for the floor, and there was a big kitchen range in there. Also there was a cupboard, and that was the coal cellar. So the coalman had to come through your scullery and kitchen to get into the coal cellar to dump your coal. that was where we lived, really. And then you come through another door, which led on one side to a flight of stairs. On the other side was a double door, which was the front door. And it was like double door, you opened it up. And then across that little passage was the sitting room, which became my father's room, my parents' room. They slept there. And that had a wooden floor. And upstairs, at the front were two big bedrooms. One was not too bad, and it had a little fireplace in it and a cupboard. And that later became our bedsit when we got married. But at that time it was all a bit rough. The other one, there was no electricity there was electricity in the house, but the other front bedroom didn't have anything. And also it had sash windows, but they went down to the floor, and they were sort of a double sash window. And you had to be careful because the bottom half used to come out. And it wasn't a very safe house, but to us it was a home. We made it our home.